Welcome to America's Talking. I'm your host, Cole McNeely. America's Talking is a production of America's Talking Network. You can go check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. A debate occurred between former President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris over the nation's future and who will be the next president of the United States. And joining me to discuss this is the Center Square's executive editor, Dan McCaleb. Dan, welcome back to America's Talking.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
We also have the Center Square's D.C. Bureau Chief, Casey Harper. Casey.
Thanks, Cole. It's good to be here.
And we also have Anthony Hennen, Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, where the debate took place. Hey, Anthony.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right, Dan, I want to start with you. This debate between Harris and Trump, it was certainly interesting, had its highs and lows. Let's just kind of start with, what was the performances? How were they? Were they good, bad? I mean, what was your position on how things went for the former president and the current vice president?
I don't know that it was good for either one of them necessarily. I felt like former President Donald Trump missed some significant opportunities to criticize Vice President Harris on a number of issues, from inflation and the economy. He did touch on some of this stuff, and the ongoing border crisis, energy issues, and Biden and Harris's energy policies, putting more restrictions on fossil fuels and that kind of thing. And I think Harris, I don't want to say she won the debate, because I don't think she was particularly strong either, but she was successful in distracting Donald Trump a number of different times, whether it be the crowd sizes at his debates or whatever. So I don't know if it's going to sway voters, if it's going to sway independent voters or not, the outcome of the debate. But I wasn't really impressed by either candidate.
And Casey, as Dan mentioned, topics of conversations were a little all over the place. We had, obviously immigration being a theme, but then we went down the rabbit hole of eating of family pets, supposedly, which I think the local authorities have said there's no evidence of that. We had talks of crowd size, and it was a little all over the place, and it didn't really exactly give if you were a policy wonk, I don't think you were exactly thrilled with the content you consumed.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles to take on this. I want to hit on your question. Just want to say, though, while I agree with Dan, this is a very close debate. Even a small win was big in this race, because all the polling, we'll see how the polling plays out over the next week. But going into this debate, it is a dead tie, Cole. We're talking, 50-50. The latest Harvard-Harris poll has them at 50-50 nationally, dead tie. And then if you look at the handful of swing states, Harris might be slightly winning one or Trump slightly winning the other, but they're all within the margin of error, most of them with less than a 1 point difference, and the others maybe like 1.5 points. So we're talking, this far out from the election, they might as well be tied. They're within the margin of error. And so coming into this debate, that's the landscape, a dead tie. So even a small victory could be enough to really make a difference in a race this close. I agree with Dan that this is like one of those NFL games where, both teams have like 3 field goals, could never really convert in the red zone. No defensive touchdowns, just grinding it out, barely getting field goal, low scoring. And I do think, though, Harris had a slight edge on Trump. To your questions, Cole, there were several times where both candidates had sort of errors. I think nobody did anything that was really impressive or had great moments, in my view, but they both had errors. The problem is with Trump's campaign is that his errors were a little bit more glaring. He went off on this pets being eaten thing, which the media was really quick to say that's a conspiracy theory. Funnily enough, I actually think that there's more reporting left to be done on that. There is some evidence for it. Some of the local officials have said they don't have evidence, but there have been, interviews with local residents, stuff that it's not just totally fabricated out of thin air. There was some initial evidence. I think we'll find out how real it really is over the next couple of weeks, but it still just came across as strange. The crowd sizes, Trump went off on his crowd sizes, which is kind of like Trump at his worst, the immature, worried about the sizes. And what he missed was the opportunity to really push Harris on what you're talking about, Cole. Is one of the biggest criticisms against Harris is that she's light on policy details. And not only that, she's flip-flopped on some major policy things like the border. And he didn't push her on that. Say, were you right when you opposed the border wall, or were you right when you supported the Senate bill to build the border wall? Which time were you wrong? Or, you don't want to lock people up for marijuana now, but you made your career off of locking people up for marijuana. So were you wrong then, or were you wrong then? He had some really missed opportunities there. Instead, he got caught up in things. So I say a slight win for Harris on this one.
And Anthony, I want to bring you in here. Obviously, the debate took place in Pennsylvania. Energy and fracking, that was a big topic of conversation. Politicians have a tendency to cater to whatever state they're in. So if they were in Wisconsin, they would have loved cheese more than any other politician has ever loved cheese in the entire world. But it was a big conversation point, energy and fracking. How do you think that landed in Pennsylvania? Obviously, a swing state. Do you think either of these candidates really communicated something on the energy front that would sway an undecided voter?
Well, I think it's hard to say simply because the energy portion of the debate was so short. Each candidate essentially said their quick couple sentences and really moved on. Unsurprisingly, Trump came out saying that she would ban fracking on day one if she gets the chance, referencing Harris's pledge back in 2019 to that there was no question she would get rid of fracking. When she became Joe Biden's vice presidential candidate in 2020, she backed away from that, said she would not ban fracking, and that's where she stands now, and really hammers on this idea of investing in a lot of different energy sources. She also what was interesting, she went beyond that and said due to the Inflation Reduction Act, which she was the tie-breaking vote in favor of, she argued that she's actually helping these oil companies and boosting fracking, which is interesting in Pennsylvania because a lot of this debate nationally has talked about it's almost treating fracking as a third rail in Pennsylvania. But voters here in the Commonwealth are a lot more split on fracking than that actually implies. When we look at the polls, I mean, people are generally a little more supportive of fracking, but it's 48%, 44%, according to a 2022 poll. It's interesting because Pennsylvanians are of two minds here. Almost none of them doubt that natural gas is a big industry here in the state, and 86% say that the natural gas industry helps the state's economy. But at the same time, there's a genuine majority concern of the environmental risks or the risk to public health from fracking and from not making sure we're doing it carefully and making sure that people are protected. And it's a shame that we didn't really get much more from either candidate on this. Natural gas is a base of energy in Pennsylvania, and by extension, the base of the PJM energy grid, which stretches across 13 states, Washington, D.C., and 65 million Americans. So I think it would have been nicer to see more emphasis here in the debate of what is the future of energy in Pennsylvania, because that really matters for, a broad swath of the country and how we will be living, what emissions will look like, and what the economy will look like.
If I can jump in here again, I think energy is a perfect example where former President Trump blew an opportunity on it. Just a couple of years ago, we had record high gas prices. The national average was more than $5 a gallon. Yes, it's moderated since then, but that was a real pain point for Americans. At the Center Square, we've reported that under the Biden-Harris administration, they put more than 200 new restrictions on the oil and gas industry, the coal industry, etc. Renewable energy hasn't stepped up, not even close to step up to replace the oil and gas industry when it comes to energy generation and energy creation. And we do know that in the next several years, the energy output, it's going to increase significantly, the need for more energy. So again, just another wasted opportunity, I thought, for President Trump.
And Casey, I want to bring this back to you. So, I think you mentioned it was kind of like a football game with a lot of field goals. And I think it's an accurate assessment, I think.
Casey is anti-kicker, apparently.
Anti-kicker.
He's actually a D1 athlete, little known fact. But
I actually know that's not true. But that being said, you kind of mentioned that. It seemed like Trump was trying to make a lot of trick plays, deep passes down the field, didn't seem to be connecting on a lot of them. Harris had a pretty conservative, and not politically speaking, but in terms of her rhetoric and how it was a pretty conservative approach to a debate. She did not go heavily after Trump. And one of the things from Trump's perspective, obviously, when you're debating an incumbent, this was the benefit when Biden was the presumptive nominee in the previous debate, that you can look back at the term of what the person was in and say, hey, you were there, you're there. Why haven't you done it? If you think these are so many great ideas, why is the light switch going to flip, January of 2025? He hit that. He did say that, but that felt clouded by a lot of other things that had nothing to do with the work of the people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he made that point, but it was like halfway into a 90-minute debate when people's, I think, had changed the channel or eyes started to glaze over, and it came after argument about the size of the crowds and all those things. I think some of his best points, to your point, got lost in the shuffle. I mean, as far as, if we want to continue the metaphor a little bit further, I mean, I think Trump just had to run the ball up the middle every play and stick to what he's good at, and he would have won. Inflation, economy, the border. You could have fixed this. You could fix it right now. You and Biden could sign an executive order today to close the border, to instruct DHS to do that, and you're not doing it. Are you going to do it tomorrow? What about Friday? What about Saturday?
And real quick, Casey, what's interesting on that note is Harris said, hey, tonight in this debate, Trump's going to randomly bring in immigration. He's randomly going to bring in this issue. She called that out, and he said, I'm not going to do that. That's what he said. It seemed like she did kind of get him off his game a little bit from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, she was well prepared. She baited him at the right time on the immigration question, got him off base. I think she also had the help of the moderators. I think, I don't think they were the most biased we've ever seen, but I think they were left leaning and fact checked Trump more often than Harris, kind of phrased questions where Trump was on the defensive, let Harris get away with some things. But, that's kind of to be expected. He agreed with the debate with ABC. I think one thing to point out, why this is probably a moral victory for Harris. I mean, it's easy for us to say, okay, it was roughly a tie, but remember last time Trump debated a Democrat, he ended the campaign of that Democrat. So in Harris's mind, she's relatively new, not been introduced. She came in, Biden literally ended his campaign last time, he went to a debate stage. So she's probably got that fear coming in. And so for her to not lose, I think was a victory for her because, just a month ago, there was real question of if she could even be the candidate, if she could even solidify the delegates, the endorsements, the general appeal of the base and the Democratic Party. And so if there was any cementing that needed to be done, she did it here. I think she is the candidate now. She could have dropped the ball. I mean, if she had totally fumbled and embarrassed herself in this debate, maybe they're scrambling again. I mean, there's a lot of things that could have happened. So by not losing, it was a moral victory for sure.
Yeah, a lot of football metaphors there too, and phrases. One of the things, Casey,
sorry, as a D1 athlete, it just comes out.
So I bet. One of the things you mentioned that I thought was well put was she seemed to debate not to lose instead of to win, and that was considered a victory for her. Dan, I do want to go back to the moderator question. The moderators certainly made their presence be felt, right? That felt a little bit different than even the CNN debate with President Biden taking part on the Democratic side. Watching it, Donald Trump is certainly a much different candidate than Mitt Romney was, but it did bring back memories of when Candy Crowley in 2012 was arguing and fact-checking with Mitt Romney on the stage about, I forget what it was at the time, but when these moderators invoke themselves into the debate and they become the story, I'm not sure it actually contributes much. The live quote fact checking, at least from their perspective.
Yeah, and I'm going to go further than what Casey said. I thought their bias was fairly clear. Of course, we anticipated that was possible going into the debate. ABC hosted this debate. CNN hosted the debate that Casey referenced earlier between Trump and Biden back in June that ended Biden's candidacy. I thought these moderators were more biased than the CNN moderators were back in June. What surprised me was, Trump in the past has gone after the moderators and the networks, deeming them liberal and biased for the Democrats, etc. And he did very little of that last night. They did fact check Trump on a number of occasions, didn't do near as much of that with Vice President Harris, but another opportunity perhaps missed by the former president.
Well, we sit here and we work day in and day out in the media industry, and Dan, it gave me pause to sit there and think, is that how you should do that and handle that? As a moderator, as a, supposed to be impartial moderator, is live fact checking really the best thing for you to do? Because, I don't know. I mean, that really, any amount of that feels very out of place. Is this the time and place to be doing fact checking? Right? Dan, I can mute your microphone and fact check you and then move on to something else. It felt, as a media person, it feels weird to me. I mean, take a step aside from the news aspect. That feels weird to me to say that's going to be our process. We're going to try to live fact check people during a debate, turn off their microphone and move on to a new subject. I'm just not sure that'd be the way I would handle it.
Well, look, a large number of Americans polling across the country shows this, including the Center Square's Voters' Voice poll. A large percent of Americans don't trust the mainstream media. And last night, Tuesday night's debate, is one of the reasons why. It was, I'd be interested in getting Anthony's perspective on this. I thought there was a clear bias on the part of moderators. That's me as a viewer going into it, knowing that bias could possibly be there. Casey gave his opinion. I'd be interested in hearing what Anthony's thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because when you say you're going to do, fact checks in the moment and things like that you're opening yourself up to look very biased, to look like you're, putting your hand on the scale, this sort of thing. I think what jumped out at me on that was when Harris said that, there are no U.S. troops in combat zones right now, which I thought was an egregious miss by the moderators to point out. I mean, last month, August 13th, 8 U.S. troops were injured in Syria during a drone attack. I mean, we have something like almost 1,000 troops in Syria right now, another 2,500 in Iraq. I thought that could have been a chance for them to at least, if you're going to do fact checking, there were a few clear misses they made on Harris, whereas it seemed like they were very quick to jump on Trump. And, this is the problem with Trump's speech of he will say all sorts of things. He will go on tangents. He will throw a lot out there. But it seems like, there's a way to pick through that. Do you go after the things Trump says are minor? Do you go after what are major? Do you focus on him at the expense of Harris? How do you handle this? And I think especially in last night's debate where you didn't see a lot of actual policy discussion. You saw a lot of arguments and attacks on each other. The American people watching this or voters considering, they're getting frustrated because, if you go out and if you're shouting campaigns who are knocking on doors, you hear from people. I heard this yesterday when I was out in Pennsylvania. Undecided voters who are getting annoyed because even the attack ads they see, it's all about how the other guy is terrible, but not what a candidate will actually do for people. And I think that's another outrun of what we saw yesterday. And I think how fact-checking was used last night will further that problem.
Yeah, I'm going to stick on the fact-checking here for a second, Dan. This feels like we're going to stick with the football metaphor. Casey, you brought it in. We're going to stick with it. When you watch a game, and the next day, everybody or a lot of people or the losing team or whatever, the team who won doesn't usually care about the referees. But the team who lost, boy, they care about the referees. And when the conversation is about the referees the next day, hey, that might be a reality check that maybe the referees were making it a little bit more about them than about what was actually important here. And that's what I keep going back to on the moderators, which is the same deal. The debate happens. People are going to feel how they're going to feel. The fact that there is a large percentage of the country sitting there saying the moderators, Jake Tapper, and forgive me, I forget who was with him on that CNN debate panel with Biden. That really wasn't the conversation after that. I mean, it really wasn't. It was about the candidate, President Biden. I just think it's a misjudgment and doesn't give the right product to the viewer. That's my 2 cents. Dan, I do have one other, thing here to say. Okay, we went through another presidential debate. Did this change anything?
Well, I don't think so personally, but maybe the polling that comes out post debate, maybe we'll have a better idea. Certainly if you're, a Trump supporter, the debate didn't change anything. Certainly if you're a Kamala Harris supporter, the debate didn't change anything. The question is the groups in the middle, those group of people in the middle who maybe are still undecided, heading into the election. Did it change them? I don't necessarily see how, unless they were going into the debate looking for a reason not to vote for Trump, but they weren't yet sold on Vice President Harris. Maybe some of them were swayed by the debate, but I don't know how many. And maybe the polling that comes out in the next week or two, as Casey referenced, maybe we'll find that out.
Casey, you're sitting there in D.C. Obviously, that's where the White House is, the nation's capital. Do people even pay attention to this anymore? I mean, seriously, the debates in the political circles, does any of this even matter in the nation's capital, or is this just a sideshow?
I don't think it matters in the nation's capital. People here are lockstep and kind of like cogs in their respective machines. But I do think the debate matters nationally. It matters in Pennsylvania. It matters in Ohio and in Michigan and Wisconsin. And I think since the debate was very light on policy, what really matters is tone and how people are perceived. And so that's why I think we're focusing so much on Trump talking about his rallies, talking about these things, coming across a little bit angry when there's no policy hardly. And it's just he said, she said, and, random attacks. It's just like, how do people feel? What is the vibe of someone? And, we've talked on various programs in the past about this being a vibe election. Harris purposefully being light on policy, hoping to just have a better vibe generally than Trump and being the joy candidate. Walz is over there dancing around and smiling, and Kamala's laughing. And meanwhile, Trump is angry about the border. And, I think a lot of people are angry about the border and what's happening in the country. And so Trump resonates with a lot of people, but generally they're trying to stick to their respective vibes. And they did that. I think one of the main problems though, is that the key demographic in this election is suburban women. And I suspect that the joy and lighter, more optimistic tone of Harris's debate performance will do a little bit more to appeal to those suburban women than Trump's tenor in the debate. But time will tell. Trump bucks all trends. He bucks demographic trends. He's winning. He's doing so well with Hispanics when a decade ago, he was considered a racist candidate who hated Hispanics. I mean, he bucks these trends. So it's not so neat and tidy as, politics and demographics normally are. So it's definitely going to be close to watch. CenterSquare.com is going to have the best coverage. Our various podcasts as well. This race is by no means over. It's going to be a nail-biter right up until November.
Certainly will be an interesting race to continue to follow up until November. Casey, Dan, Anthony, thanks for joining us today on America's Talking. And if you enjoyed this show, go check out all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. That's americastalking.com.